Well, welcome everybody to Nielsen Seed's first ever webinar. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. We have a wealth of information for you here, I think it's safe to say. Introducing Alexis Arthur, which is the other person you see on the screen. She is from Delta, BC, but actually grew up in Port Isla Prairie. Her and her dad runs Pacific Forage Bag. So they sell corn seed, silage baggers, inoculants. I got to know Alexis when she was our corn rep for Thunder Seed back, when was that, 2016 you left there?
2016 was the end. Yeah, it was the end. So we got 3 years prior to that, 13 to 16.
Yeah, and we've stayed in touch ever since then. Alexis went from being the corn girl to the corn guru, and then became the corn goddess because she is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to corn. And you came from a background with Prairie Pacific Seeds. For 9 years, I believe you guys ran that company.
Yes.
Focusing, correct me if I'm wrong, mostly on silage silage corns back in that day.
It was, yeah.
So that was why we asked Alexis to speak to these specific topics today. She's got the knowledge, and I like to pick her brain from time to time, and now we all get to do that.
So, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I'll quit talking here and let Alexis take it away here.
Great. So I want to talk about making good silage great, or even better. Soren's sort of given the intro on me, so I'm not going to bother wasting more time talking about that. So what I want to look at basically is my focus is going to be on corn silage, because my understanding is I'm speaking mostly to beef producers, and the feeding makeup is mostly corn silage and hay and probably grain amendments, etc. So today I'm going to look at start to finish what silage is and what we're doing with it and why it matters. I want to look at basically silage specifically, what's in there, looking at feed analysis and what we should be looking for, why we should be caring about this silage and wanting to make it better, looking at costs and loss. And then how do we improve if we have those sorts of losses? And starting from the beginning, looking at our corn, our pack, our cover, our feed out. And then there's a few, if people have questions, there's a couple of extra little things we can reference. There's a lot of information here, so I apologize. I'm going to speak quickly and I'm going to move through. And if there's times when you're like, whoa, 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 I throw out a comment to Soren and I can back up. I'm just trying to do it within the time frame. So first off, why silage? Well, why we'd make silage on paper is there's more nutrients preserved per acre with less field loss. And that's why there was a great movement towards it in the first place. You have the potential to get more off a field per year with less damage than, say, a hay. You get a lot of volume in one cut and a lot of tons on that acre as compared to any other feedstock you'd probably be able to bring in. A little less affected by weather. You aren't looking for a particular haying weather on this. You can grab something when the nutrient's right, as opposed to necessarily having to always watch Mother Nature. A little less labor intensive than putting up hay. And you can ensile a variety of products. It doesn't just have to be corn. That is what we're going to talk about, but you can ensile a variety of products. Where the problems come in are mismanagement can lead to loss and spoilage, which is costly because corn particularly is not a cheap product to put up. Storage space is very specific, and it can't be transported easily. I mean, you can buy it from a neighbor, but as soon as you're moving it and reintroducing oxygen, there's going to be some loss. So it's not as easy as hay that way. For beef operations, I will say, and you will note through a lot of this, most research is done on dairy operations and silage with regards to dairy and milk production, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really has been moving into the beef market far more. States earlier than here, but it's doing quite well. So I noted something that Ray Bintner, who's your Ministry of Ag livestock specialist, talked about last year at the Ag Show there in Brandon, and he was referencing basically the points that I just talked about. Yes, there is a higher cost on it than hay, but there's better nutrition, calf health, fewer abortions due to molds, easier calving, rebreeding, and faster gains that they've found in the research they're doing. On this point, I just want to state that there's more research happening in the prairies with regards to feed. than there is out in my neck of the woods. So I would really look up some of the research that's there, and I would even query people to, if you have interest in it, to what's coming up and what they can do, because there's a lot of potential there with regards to finding out the best ways of making things better. Again, it references the detraction of you having to feed it where it's produced, but again, also a positive is that you don't necessarily have to fight the weather in the same manner. What I like there is this outstrips dry hay in terms of digestible nutrients based on 40,000 samples from 2007 to 2015. The fact that they're looking into this on such a regular basis and they have such a large body to look at is really effective. So it's based on research that I think is there. What is silage? So I like this definition, I always have, because it tells you everything you need and every problem that could be there. It's product form when forage with adequate moisture content is stored anaerobically. That means no oxygen. We don't want oxygen, keeping the oxygen out. But it being at risk of spoilage by aerobic oxygen feeding microorganisms. Okay, so everything we need is right there. We're referencing our main points. What are they? Moisture. We need the proper moisture. It's told us we do. Needs to exclude oxygen. Key to the whole game. And we're going to have to do those two things to inhibit spoilage. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Really simple, right? Well, not so. In 2014, there was this paper put out about valuing corn silage for beef cattle, and I wanted to bring it up here. What is the key and why is it valuable for beef cattle and any is energy and roughage. This is a product you're not looking at this product for protein and build, you're looking at it for energy, key and off the top. And so maintaining that energy is very, very important. Roughage, all those tons you can get off that field are dollars in the bank for you, and we want to make good use of them. But moisture levels are critical. Okay, and they must be followed. If you're using 65%, which is, as they say, model perfect, that aids in packing effectively, which means you're keeping the oxygen out, which means you're going to have proper fermentation. What does that mean? The pH is dropping below 5 as quickly as you can, because then you go into a pickling and siling state. But for that to happen, oxygen has to be excluded. And if it's not, you don't get that pH drop as quick, and the bad bugs are starting to eat your nutrients right away, okay? The good bugs in this product will form acidic and lactic acids, which increase that quick drop of pH, and so you want a lot of those bugs there so that they can defeat the bad ones. But if you don't do this process well, we have poor fermentation, odors, molds and yeast development, and of course, reduced intake because the product isn't as effective. So what are the values in it? Why I'm doing this, but what's in there that really does matter, and why should I look at it? So we all get these feed samples. A lot of times the nutritionists are working at them, telling us, okay, good, bad, we're going to need more of this. This is how we're going to go through it. It's valuable to be able to read them somewhat yourself. When I look, again, I'm talking corn silage feed value specifically. I'm looking at my moistures, my dry matters, ADF, NDF, NDFD, lignin, starch, ash, too, sort of depending on what's happening in the season, and TDN. Those are my biggies. I do a green test. When we do corn trials, I do a green sample, which means I take it right out of the, we've just coming off the field. I take a sample of it, put it in a bag, squish out the air, seal it, stick it in the freezer. Then I get a baseline. That's what that product was like when it went in to be ensiled. Then the farmer later does another one. And what we should be seeing with corn silage is increased values, things getting better. I don't mean increased numbers necessarily on everything. I mean things getting better. And that's because corn silage specifically over everything else gets better over a 9-month period. It actually plateaus at a peak at about 6 months, which means the longer you can leave it ensiled before you feed it, the better it gets month over month. All right. But if we have our baseline, we can go, okay, I'm here. So I have an expectation of what my improvements will be. Now, this next bit's pretty dense, but let's go through it as quickly as we can. So dry matter tons. I'm interested in what my dry matter is when I look. So what is dry matter? That refers to material that remains after you take the moisture out. So if I have a 65% moisture in my product, that means I'm looking at a 35% dry matter. All right. So that dry matter, if I look at all my tons on a field and I take out the moisture from it, I have my green tons, I take the moisture away. If I have 14 tons on my field and I'm at a 70% moisture, I go 14 times 30, that would be my dry matter percentage. That means I have 4.2 dry matter tons per acre. Okay. That means if I take out the moisture, that's how many tons go in the animal's gut. That's what they're getting their nutrition from. That's what's bulking them up. All right. So we can't just look at green tons. We have to look at what's there when the moisture's gone. So that's why that dry matter matters on that test. Here's a whole lot of information. We'll just look at it. ADF, that basically refers to the cell wall and how the structure of it and how it's going to break down. When you look at that number, you're wanting to see, say, a 22 to a 30%. The higher the number, the less digestible. NDF, that's neutral detergent fiber. We're looking at about a 38 to 50. Same thing. The higher the number, the less digestible. The key about NDF is if that gets too high, they don't consume as much. It's too hard for them for it to work through their rumen, and they aren't going to take in enough, and they're not going to gain as effectively. From a dairy cow perspective, they're not going to make as much milk. So you want this is where they talk about digestibility. You want this product to be more digestible. NDF, when you see that, that means they've taken the amylase, which is an enzyme, out. And NDFD, this is another big one that I quite like. You'll often see NDFD with a number behind it, like a 24 or a 48. That indicates they've taken some of that sample. They basically, I envision it in like a petri dish. Stick it in a dish that has like stomach acids, that like what would be in a cow, and they leave it there for whatever that number is. 24 would be 24 hours, 48 hours. And then they measure how much has digested in that time. So for 24 hours, the recommendation made on this page that I pulled from was 40%. 48 hours, they were saying you want to see a digestibility of 60%. So that's showing you not just what the measurement is of its digestibility, but how it breaks down in the cow's gut, so you really get a sense. Starch, of course, in corn, that's a number that means a lot for me. That indicates energy. That indicates how much viable energy is right there that you've put in there. And that really can be significant with regards to if your starch is significant, you might not have to bring in as much grain because you're getting it out of this silage. But it also means with all that sugar, with all those sugars and viable product in there, it's really good to the bad bugs too. So ensiling really matters. So 25 all the way up to 35, magnificent. Okay, if you can get high. And if you can, again, you look at that number when you start on your green test, and it will increase over time as your product ensiles over the months. Lignin, that's basically if your plant, that's how your plant is standing. So the standability of it is related to the lignin. They use it as the glue that holds everything together. But high lignin can mean it's harder to digest. That cell wall is so thick it can be harder to digest. So there's a fine line between a good lignin for standability and also, we're affecting digestibility. So 2 to 4 is where they talk about. Equations. Here, net gain, you guys will use sort of a net gain. There's a net lactation as well. They want it to be about 1. That's a number you can look at with regards to what the gain potential is on it. It's an equation made. But the bigger one here I want to reference is TDN. So that's total digestible nutrient. It's an equation that uses NDF, lignin, fat, starch, minerals, and protein. And they put those numbers together and they come up with sort of the total digestible nutrient. It's like a total number. Overall, what this is telling you is we're looking at this kind of total digestible nutrient. The expectation is to see it in the low 70s, 73, things like that are nice. That's a good one for corn silage. I put relative feed value because honestly, that's not a corn number. Relative feed value was one that was made to facilitate how much protein was available in alfalfa hay, and it was a great number when you were buying and selling hay. But it doesn't. It's a protein-based number, and we're not looking for protein intensely in corn. So I would say you look at your TDN. Okay, that's your equation. That's your overall number. You can look at if you need something like that as well. There can be on tests like On a dairy side, there can be pounds of milk per acre, and there can also be pounds of gain or kilograms of gain per acre, and that's an equation as well that can give you an overall number for what the value of this product is. Sometimes it's there, and sometimes it isn't, but it can be requested most often. All right, so we've got this product. We know what's in it. We understand, okay, when we're looking at these tests, what we're doing with it. But so why? You know, what's the reason for it? So my argument is, if you can make the nutritive value in there higher, you have a better product, which makes it sort of do a lot more for you, and the price of it then becomes reasonable. So if you're increasing the value of that silage, then in your ration of what you're feeding with your hay or any of your grain supplements, etc., this becomes kind of your steak, you know, because if you make this product really well then and can minimize loss, then you don't have to buy as much grain, and you increase the digestibility. So what they eat, that works through their system effectively. They don't have to eat tons more. You don't have to overfeed to try and do the same thing. You increase that digestibility, therefore, and you're saving on your investment. What you're taking off the field is getting into the cow, and they're utilizing that effectively. If it isn't made as effectively as it could be, then it does become more of a belly filler, but it's a pretty expensive belly filler, and that's not where we want to be. Okay, so how do we make it? Well, think about it as our own food. If we eat well, if we eat a great meal, we don't come home then and eat a bag of chips. We're satiated, we feel good, does the right things for our body. It's the same thing for our cows. If we put up really good feed, they don't need to eat a whole ton after they've eaten it. They eat it effectively, they utilize it effectively, and they gain effectively. Super, but in wanting to turn this silage into a steak, what's that going to cost us? So these numbers, specifically and wholly, I took from the Manitoba Crop Production Guideline, which again, I think is a really cool thing, whether you agree with them or not, or whether they equate to what you use. It's a nice just sort of place to stop and look. So I'm utilizing them wholly and completely, not because I think they represent exactly what you guys spend, but this can just do an apples to apples situation for me. So on their breakdown, I did corn silage, alfalfa. It was an alfalfa grass mixed silage, simply for comparison. Timothy hay on an establishment year that they provided, and then the annual costs afterwards. I then also from them took their range or their estimate on what production would be for 2019. Now, I can argue whatever I want to argue with regards to me thinking it could be higher or lower or this or that, but I'm just going to use exactly what they put in, just again to compare apples to apples. So on this breakdown, corn silage, they stated was 14 tons estimate per acre. I put in, you know, up to 18, and 4 dry matter tons. So they're using a specific moisture, which remember we discussed earlier is probably about 70%. So I put 4 to 5 dry matter, but we're going to utilize 4 dry matter tons off of that, okay, when I take away 70% moisture. Alfalfa silage was 6 with a 3 dry matter ton, and the Timothy hay, it was in at actually at metric tons, so I just converted it to short tons just as a comparison, so it was 2.49. If I look at how much the silage with this number costs per ton, then the corn silage is $32.64 a ton. Alfalfa is $39.94 a ton based on their bottom line, and Timothy hay is 56.57 on the established year and 73.94 on the annual years. On dry matter tons, I'm going to take my 4 now. I'm going to take my 4 dry matter tons. Okay, I'm going to take away my moisture and look at what that is on this cost. Well, that cost me $113.34 on a dry matter ton basis. So you can see why that dry matter, why maintaining the value in that product and putting it up is important. Because if I'm going to lose any of that nutrient, if I'm going to lose that fodder that's there that I've worked hard to ensile, I'm losing a lot of dollars. It's not nothing. Okay. So how much can I lose? Well, this A lot of the research that exists, really, there was a huge amount of research in the US in the 90s and the early 2000s, because that's really when silage started to take off. And so they were like, oh, now everybody's starting to do this silage. How are we going to put it up? And how's the best way we're going to be really effective with it? This was created a number of years back. This came out in 2000, and it's sort of been replicated in various ways again and again. I've highlighted the uncovered only because, I'll be honest, in my travels when I was repping with corn, Manitoba was the place where I saw the most uncovered piles and bunks that I'd seen anywhere. I'm not saying that's the same now. It's been a number of years since I've really gone farm to farm, but I'm just doing a highlight. So they took all the ways we could put the feed up. So a bunker, which is a walled facility, okay, with an open top in front, without a cover, with a cover. A stack is what they mean a drive over pile on a stack, uncovered, covered, and then bags. Okay, so the bags. So they did a variety. You can see the paper. They did a variety of them, and so they're average. So at filling, when you're putting the product in off the field, anywhere from a 1% to a 7% loss potential. Seepage. So that is any seepage coming in, moisture in or out, 0 to 1%. Gas. When you ensile, all product at the ensiling phase, gas is off initially, okay, as the fermentation process is beginning. But that's natural. But where it gets too high is another thing, is when bad bacteria starts to eat at your sugars, one of the things it produces is CO2. Okay, its waste product is CO2 and moisture. And so if the gassing process continues, that's the CO2, that's the bad bacteria eating your nutrients. So this is where you're going from a 5% up to a 12%. And you're seeing the higher percentages on uncovered because oxygen is continuing to be available on the face of that, and bad bacteria is using that oxygen, living happily and eating your nutrient and letting off, gassing off CO2. As well as other things, but that's just one of the simple. Surface, so loss off the surface. So whatever surface is showing, this is just what I explained, loss off of that. The lowest is in a bag because, of course, it's closed, right? There's very little, there's no surface there to be seen, up to 24%. So, and that would be the highest on an uncovered drive over pile because it's the largest open space. There's no walls. And then at feed out. So this is the time when normally you'd be opening up the pile, cutting into it and starting to feed out. And what do you do at that time? That's a reintroduction of oxygen to areas of it that have had no oxygen. So now you're reintroducing oxygen. The dormant bad bugs can sort of come alive again, and they're going to want to use that oxygen to try and find sugars and carbohydrates, etc., to feed off of. And so there we go. And so bags 1 to 5 up to 3 to 15 at feed out. So those are all the same there because you're working off of a larger face, off of a pile or a bunk than on a bag. If you have a 32-foot bunk, 50-foot bunk, 50-foot wide pile that you're feeding off of, that's a larger space than even the big bags. The biggest bag now is 14-foot round, so it's a 14-foot circumference, still a smaller face than on those. So you'd see similar feed outs. So now you add all those up. Our lowest is 9% loss, and our highest is 58%. So what, again, significant there is when it's not covered, you do see the highest loss, because again, it's been open to the largest part's been open to the oxygen the longest. What I need to point out here, though, and that's why I have this up here, my 4 dry matter tons per acre to 113, this loss was reported on dry matter. So this wasn't on my 14 tons. This was on my 4. So that's 37 on that highest one, 37 to 58% of my 4 dry matter tons on that acre would be gone. That means I'm out 2, like that. And so if I'm $453 on an acre to get that dry matter ton in, I've spent over $200 and it's not in my pile anymore if I haven't covered it. Okay.
Alexis?
Yeah.
I've got a question here. So in relation to this, if say a silage pile is been put up and it doesn't get covered for say a week.
Yeah.
what kind of percentage loss are we going to see on that?
Yeah, fairly significant. So there you'd be looking at, say, your filling and your gassing off. So you'd probably be looking within anywhere from a 7% to a 20%, even that quickly. And why that could be, like, it depends on how dry it is, etc. That's why the higher number, the drier, how well it was compacted. But what's happening, and you'll see a little further on, is immediately when you're packing and you're bringing feed in, as you're packing down, immediately below that pack, if it's not packed effectively and you're off and it hasn't, say, been covered, within an inch or two, you have heating underneath. Those bugs are already going, and they're doing that within minutes. So it's not within hours, it's within minutes. And I do have a slide that shows sort of a heat difference so you can see. So yeah, even over, if you can do it within 24 hours, I mean, if you can do it right, in a perfect world, you're getting off the packing tractor and everybody's like, hey, here's the plastic, let's go, we love this part. If you can do it within 24 hours, then that's great, get it done. As soon as you start going over that, your percentages are increasing. And so you're going upwards of 7 to 15%, just like that. Okay.
Okay.
Quick
Good. No,
quick matters.
Answers the question.
Yeah, very good question. Okay, so what does it cost me? So then let's look at this for us. So Keith Bolson's, again, someone who he's sort of considered the silage guru. He'd been doing work with Kansas State University for decades, and he's no longer there. He's an older man now, and they're working more in silage maintenance and safety. But I like how he breaks things down here. So your cost of producing forage turned silage must be calculated at the lost cost. So he has, this is a few years old, a number of years old, but if I convert to Canadian, it's weirdly close to our number right now. So if your production cost is $25, so that's American, so say 33. If you divide by 90%, that gives you a 10% loss. So your true cost would be 27. So for us, 37. If you divide by 75%, that's a 25% loss. And when we look at our numbers, that's not out of range. In fact, for some of them, that's low. Your true cost would be $33 or 44 Canadian. So then let's go down to our numbers that we're using. We have our 14 tons on our acre. We have our 4 dry matter tons on our acre. So instead of, if we're considering loss, which Bolson's saying, you know, you've got to have your loss in there. That's your cost. Instead of it being $456 per acre to produce, it's $616. And instead of it being $32.64 a ton to produce, it's $44 a ton. And instead of it being $113 of dry matter to produce, it's $154. That's a difference of $40 on dry matter tons per acre. So if I was growing 100 acres, that's $4,000. So I don't have that money to throw out there, and I sure know that you guys don't either. So the whole statement is how you bring it in and ensile it is money in your pocket, because if you're going to lose that 25%, that's like leaving a quarter of it. Just, you've paid for it, you've done it, but you might as well just leave a quarter of it out there and not chop it. Just leave it. Nobody wants to do that. That's not ever the plan when we start. So what does loss look like? Now, I'm going to use the system here. Spoilage are the spoilage microorganisms. So again, I call them bad bugs. They thrive in the presence of oxygen, and they can help create molds and yeasts, and have these aerobic, meaning, you know, air breathing organisms, convert our sugars and our carbs to carbon dioxide, water, and heat. And that result is dry matter loss. So you can also see it in increased fiber content, meaning hard to digest, higher ammonia, elevated pH, bad coloring. So I want to show you some pictures. Let me just see if I can pull this off, okay? Just bear with me. And share. So Keith Bolson, who I referenced, this is a thing he showed in 2007. And it's available online. You can go on and look up a number of things, and some of this is really useful. So this is something he presented at the Tulare Ag Show back in 2007. And I want to just go up and show, he was showing at the university, at Kansas State, he had his students and they were out to make good and bad bunks and show them. So in 1990 they did this, and so they were showing there's a sealed bunk on one side and an unsealed, so meaning a covered and uncovered, and what that showed. And so the first trial showed over 50% of dry matter was lost on the original top 4 feet on the corn silage after 6 months in the uncovered. So you can see that line of loss there, that breakdown. We all see it. You know, it's so we can see it there. You don't see it so much on the other side though. Okay, so we don't have that crust. We don't have this big dark line. So then the next year, you know, bear with me as I do this. Sorry guys. The next year, there we go. The next year they did it again, and in that trial, second trial showed that 50% of the dry matter was lost in the original top 4 feet of corn silage after 6 months of an unsealed bunker. Okay, so all right, so that's fine. They're proving put on plastic. Okay, we get it. We're hearing you. This was in 1998. So they did it again with corn silage, but they covered it. But they say it wasn't a good seal or cover. And so here's another thing. Not a good seal or cover means that they weren't necessarily weighting it all, say tires, end to end, all the way through. They were probably just putting the tires on and tacking them down. So he's on top of the pile, and he's showing that that was 3 feet of feed. That was 3 feet of feed. And what's happened is it has compressed down to 22 inches. And you can see the 15 inches absolutely discolored. So that means there's been loss of nutrient, absolute effect on dry matter, not as good a product. Then there's that sort of 7 inches of what they called sludge. They described it as being quite slimy. And there's that loss, that 14 inches is, I mean, it's gone, it's not there. So there's my argument is silage doesn't settle. You know, it's not sort of a natural thing that you have this much and then you don't anymore. This is loss, okay? This is a breakdown of feed. This is a loss of dry matter. Bad bugs have eaten at viable, useful product. And this is kind of what's left of it. All right, so, and here, there, okay, now just bear with me again. Here also, new share, just bear with me guys, I'm almost there. So I'm talking about the 90s. Here too, this also online, you can go take a look at. This is a Cornell University presentation that they did, and this was very much solely, it's worthwhile going to look at it. Yes, it's for dairy. The research was done at dairies, 3 different dairies, but it's solely looking at people who are putting feed up. Okay, and they really reference in it that this is for people putting feed up, and the managers on site doing it, and let's just look at doing this better. So what they were showing was in 2009 they were at these 3 different dairies, and this is what they were seeing. These were the piles. So in this first one they had an unmanageable pile that they just weren't doing effectively. In the second farm they had a bunker, so they had walls, but it was going way higher and out in front, and they weren't managing it well, and so there was loss. And then on the third one they had a big pile that they started doing well, but they got to a size where the feed was beyond what they could manage, and so they had so much loss as they were going through. And then in management changes, okay, so in doing things differently and looking at their loss and saying we don't want to do it like this anymore, they made changes. And so by 2014 the one changed to a bunker. They went to a bunker that they could manage and pack more effectively. The guys who'd done the bunker decided, no, on size and on the footprint we have, we're going to do a big drive over pile, but a manageable size, and do it in the right way so that we can feed out effectively. And the last one went from an unmanageable pile to doing bags. And it goes all through the loss that they had and then where they got to, and how that was significant. And it's significant changes, but it really all comes down to packing, better density, good moistures, and feed out. Okay, so there's nothing different from what he was doing in the early 2000s to now. Unfortunately, there's not a magic wand that says, hey, you just don't have to worry about moisture anymore. No, packing, but that doesn't matter. It's fine. We've taken care of that. No, it's all the same stuff. Moisture, packing, feeding out effectively. Okay, now, let me get back. Bear with me. Now I go back to, oh no.
Alexis,
Yeah,
we got a couple follow-up questions.
go ahead.
Can we shoot them in there now?
Do it. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Okay. One guy was asking if we go a little further into that question in regards to not tarping the pile for a week.
Yeah.
What if we get weather stopping us from chopping halfway through putting up this pile,
Good.
and you don't get back to it for 2 days just because of weather?
Yeah.
Should you be covering that pile and start a new pile every time weather stops you from?
No, okay, so there's two things there. So that happens, and it's miserable, and it's not fair in the world. In fact, my father says specifically that if there's all that will ever exist, it exists wholly where people have to go and put plastic and tires down. He feels that it's not a fun job. He knows it's not a fun job. But what you should be doing is, if you're stopped by weather, that whatever pile you've created should be getting covered. And then when you come back to it, you can go on top of it and open it up and pile on top of it. You absolutely can. Most of us don't have the footprint to be able to, well, we'll pile over here and do this. If you do, great, then that would be the best thing. Get it all covered and put it elsewhere. Excellent. But many of us don't have that option. Once you cover it completely, if you cannot disturb it, so there's no oxygen there, that is great. But if you must, perfect. The thing not to do, and I've seen so many problems with it, is to just leave it open for 48, 36, whatever hours, and just leave it like that and say, we'll get to it when we get to it. I have a specific example. We do a corn trial at a farm, and they're custom harvesters, so they're going in a variety of different directions at one time. And one year we did the corn trial early, and then they had other jobs to do. And then they got back to their fields to do their own corn a week later. So they never bothered to cover the corn trial corn in that bunk, and they came back a week later and put their other corn on top of it. Well, I went in, I have one of those infrared cameras, and I went in, and they had inoculant on it. They had a Buchneri inoculant on it, actually, which tries to sort of inhibit heating at the face. And so when I touched the top of the corn, it felt good. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. But when I just dipped my hand in, just an inch down, I looked, and then I just scraped it back, and it was all graying mold, like fuzzy, like all mold. And it was I'm trying to think, it was about 44 degrees. And I'll be perfectly honest, I've worked with compost in the past. That's perfect composting temperature. It's just lovely. And so that stuff was we were rotting now. And that went for 5 inches down. And then that doesn't speak to what's happening below. So that's what's happening when oxygen is just sitting over top of it. So that's not a fun thing to be broken down, being broken up by weather. But if you can do one and seal it and do another, great. If you have to, please cover it to the best of your ability, and then open it up and get the other product on top. What you will then see then when you're feeding out, when you're on the face, is you probably see a dark line, and that'll mark, yeah, we were here, and then we covered it, but 2 days later we came back on, and so you'll see this dark, and it won't be huge, but you see this dark line of sort of a breakdown due to oxygen, and then your new stuff will be on top.
Yeah.
Is there another one, Soren, or?
Yeah, there is another one. The next one is in regards to oat silage bales. How much loss would we have in a bale like that?
Like haylage, like
Yeah.
a haylage bale, like a wrapped bale, or
Yeah.
do we know, like a wrapped bale? Yeah. So wrapping bales. The key to wrapping bales, they can have. Wrapped bales are quite expensive to put up with regards to, we've got net, and then we've got plastic, and then
Right.
we've got to move them, that sort of thing. So there's a value to it there. The key is tight pack. The other thing I would suggest on anyone who makes haylage of any sort like that is you need to have an inoculant on it, because you can't always, same thing, you can't always control the moisture the way you want to. But yeah, the loss on them can be significant, and most of that comes from, so when I say significant, it could be over 30%. if you aren't getting tight packed. So don't be shy on your net. Okay, do not be shy on your net. And we used to sell plaster craft. We always used to recommend a 4-layer, and that wasn't just, that wasn't just sort of 4 around this way, but so like you had 4, so you were tight. If you lay that down and you're immediately starting to see a sag or a sink, you'd know right away that your loss is going to go up. So yeah, they can be significant. Tight pack, very similar to this, but you really have to look at it in terms of, I know I could save on net and plastic if I didn't do this. It's not worth it in the long run. Spend the money on the net and the wrap and keep the dry matter in the bale.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to say I've referenced those older research, and I just threw this other one up on here just to show that this just came out of a Forage magazine. Oh my gosh, 3 months ago or something. I looked at it and grabbed it. So they're seeing the same things. Okay, even today when they're doing research, 80% can be lost in the top 10 inches, and 30% in 20 inches in uncovered situations. Okay, it's not helpful. So how do we improve? Well, we got to go to the beginning. What were we looking at on our silage description? It is product formed when forage with adequate moisture content is stored anaerobically, being at risk of spoilage through aerobic microorganisms. Well, how do we figure out that moisture? Well, it's the planter. We have to plant the corn that's going to work for us when it comes to taking it off the field. So corn silage must-haves. I know many people plant grain corn, because I know a bulk of you will also do grain corn because you're going to sell it, or you're going to use it, or you're going to feed it. And oftentimes I heard when I was working the roots with the dealers like Soren, well, I'm going to put out this many acres for grain, I'm just going to take that for silage. And I understand why, and I get it completely. It's very effective. However, if it gets too dry, as we've discussed, and you can't bring in that silage portion at a decent moisture rate, it's not going to pack well. We're not going to get rid of the oxygen. Our pH isn't going to drop. We're not going to ferment effectively. We're losing dry matter. So it's actually not a savings by doing grain and just taking off what we need. It's costing us, right? So if you can even look at it and go, I'm going to need this much silage, so I'm going to put in this product with regards to silage. And if I have extra that I don't need for grain, well, that's fine. Then at least you're going to control where your moisture is. If we're looking for a 60 to 65% moisture in that plant, that's not what we're looking for in a grain corn, okay? Not at all. So I would ask that if you're going to bring in silage, that you're bringing in a product that is good for silage. And so what do we want? Well, we want a plant that's got a lot of leaf to it. We want a strong stalk and structure so that it can wait out there for us and not topple over while we get everything else done. We want a darn good cob on it that's going to reach that moisture maturity, but that we have a lot of product too. Some guys think grain corn, I don't need a lot of fodder, but boy, I get a big cob. Well, with silage, I want both. I want leaf, I want a stand, I want some height, and I want that cob. And you can get it. And you can get it in lower heat unit that's successful. A key for you guys in the area and gals in the area that you're in is good vigor out of the ground. It's going to come up quickly and start growing even in not great springs and really sort of push out, because then you know that the development further on and the time frame you have when you're going to harvest it is going to work for you. I know also a number of you work with regards to the custom guys time frame. It's yet another reason that if your product gets left out there for a good long time, it is not drying down to the point where you're bringing in what looks like sawdust. Because again, how will that pack? Not well. Okay. My final comment on this, obviously you need this trait products, traded packages that work for you if you've got corn borer issues, etc. But my key on silage is that you really want that product processed, breaking up that kernel so that it the starch and the carbohydrates are really accessible to the cow in their rumen is really key. There was a cool bit of research, and I'm sorry, I thought I had it saved and I couldn't find it. It's in a magazine. I couldn't find it online. It looked at dent kernels, like flint dent kernels. It looked at full dent kernels. It looked at flowery grain kernels, all these different things that different salespeople can say, oh, this is the best, and this is, oh, soft kernels, we all want this. And it put them side by side, and it processed them all, and it found that in the gut, it didn't matter what kind of kernel it was, the cow's gut accessed more nutrient based on how well that kernel was processed. It didn't do as well if it was just cut open as if it was smushed flat or broken apart. Okay, so processor really matters on that harvester.
Alexis,
Yeah.
got another question here. Maybe that's what you're about to address already, but how do we determine when we should be chopping if we could get it that exact perfect day?
Coming up right now.
Sweet.
So as I showed in that last one, a lot of plants have stay green in them. All plants have stay green in them, to the point where they look beautifully green, and then that hard frost comes even later in the fall, and they're still gorgeously green, and they go gray from frost. Or you see drying at the bottom. Let's remember again, corn dries from the top down, not from the bottom up. It's a grass, top down dry. Same thing in the kernel. Top of the kernel to the bottom dry. If you are seeing a whole bunch of browning off the bottom, that is not drying down, that is drying out. If your plant is drying out from the bottom up, that plant is dying. Okay, that's not drying. So you need to go out and not stand and judge by, oh gosh, well, it's looking green, or well, no, it's totally brown. You need to go out and take that cob off, and you need to break it in half, and you need to chop those kernels in half. And you can see, as I've done here, this is at one of our trials. So I've got a flint dent at the bottom there, which is red with just a little dimple. I've got one that's just dimpling. I have a full dent beside it, all different types. And I can't just look at that cob and know. I've got to cut open and look, where's my milk line? So how does that work? If I'm looking at the top of the kernel, I see hardening or yellowing on the sides, and then it starts to dry from the top down. Okay, if I'm looking for my milk line is anything that's milky below. So if I'm right at the top of the kernel and I'm just down slightly, I'm a little bit dry up here but quite milky down, that's probably 3/4. If I'm halfway through, quite dry up top but wet at the bottom, that's half milk line. Down below, that's 1/4 milk line. Half is lovely, where, as you can see in these ones, you see white starch, like you see starch at the top. If you take your knife, it feels starchy, i.e. cornstarch. But below, there's moisture. If I am dry all the way through, right to the bottom, I'm too dry. The plant will be too dry, I'm too dry. A lot of the moisture comes from this cob when you're going in. Yes, there is some in the plant, and if it's been raining, your stalk will absorb rainwater, so like you can take in water. But from this product in siling well, you do want some moisture. So if you can be at half, that's probably ideal, as was referenced earlier. 3/4, you're a little wet. 1/4, you're getting a little dry. But if you've left it out there because it's going to be just super and it's dry all the way through, you're going to have trouble in siling. Okay, so we really do like to look at, if you take that off, I do want you to cut them open, but sometimes if you're really early and you're looking, you take one off and you do like this and just moisture just scoots out and hits somebody in the eye, we're all milk. That's all too milky, we're wet. Okay, too wet. This is just a quick thing that shows, see a 65% moisture showing like a mid-line of dry down is what that image is supposed to show. We're seeing recoverable dry matter. We're looking at about a 95% recovery on our dry matter if we're in that range. A little earlier, we're still pretty good. Okay, so if it's only at 1/4, okay, we're all right, you know, if we can come down within that range. But if we're late, we're immediately starting to go right down. And if we're totally wet, as you can see at the front, we're not recovering enough of our dry matter. We're not going to get enough of our energy and nutrition that we want. In siling, so yeah.
Another question here.
Yeah.
Rain moisture versus plant moisture. This fall we ran into a lot of very unfavorable weather, whether it doesn't matter if you're trying to chop corn or if you're harvesting, it was just crap.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, we were dealing with some real dry conditions prior to that, so we had some very dry corn silage. But a lot of corn was put up at proper moisture, or close to the proper moisture, like low 60% moisture, give or take.
Yeah.
what's the difference in having rainwater or even snow in there as moisture versus that actual plant sap or plant moisture had we
Yeah.
not had this rain and crap?
Absolutely. So one of the things often is that the plant moisture will stay within that pile more effectively, whereas rain moisture, etc., acts more like runoff.
Okay.
So you're putting it in, and you'll see it's not that doesn't happen when the plant's really wet. If the plant's really wet, you're going to see runoff. But a lot of times with rain moisture, you'll see it seep out, like sort of seep out and run out of the product more completely. And just consider it. So if I have my green plant here and say my sample, and there's moisture there, you can do a ball test too. If you grab onto your silage and you hold a ball and you have moisture coming through your hands, we're well over half milk line. Okay, it's too wet. If I grab it and I open my hand and the ball sort of sits there and holds together, that's actually quite good. And if I do that and I put my hand out and it all just kind of goes and crumbles open, there we are. Well, if it's wet from rain and I do that, still if my leaf, etc., is papery, and it's a dry plant, but there's rain there, it still won't work on my ball test so well. My hands will be wet, but it's not going to hold together as effectively. The product is dry. Rainwater will help somewhat, but you still won't get the pack. It's still not adhering together as natural plant moisture would.
Okay.
Okay.
That explains it very well. Yeah, thank you.
This I just wanted to show. I was talking about this 5 pH. So ideal fermentation, you see it drops very quickly within a day or two below the pH. But if it doesn't, this is where we get into this clostridial fermentation. So this is me not reaching below 5, which means if I get below 5, it basically is in a great pickling area, and it's ensiling really well. If I don't get down that low, my bad bugs are still happily working. Below 5, my bad bugs are not in a happy environment. They don't necessarily all die. They'll go dormant, and my feed is protected. But above that, they're happy. And also, yeasts and over fermentation can occur below this 5. So that's where sometimes inoculants come into it, where we're trying to put a whole bunch of good bugs on so that other issues don't arise even below that 5. Clostridia here, I just want to say it's a bad bug. It feeds off carbohydrates, proteins, and lactic acids. It's an energy source for them, but what it creates is butyric acid. And that is feed loss, dry matter loss, bad smelling, and it is unhealthy for animals. So we really, again, in not being able to cover, in not being able to get enough oxygen out in that top layer, things can go butyric, and that's where you get that smell. Will the cows ingest some of it? Yeah, they might, but this is not a good bug for their guts. Okay, so poor pack, not having the moisture management, that if we can't get below that 5, we're asking for some issues, even if in that top 3 feet. So how are we going to do this? So I put in my silage corn and I've done my tests and I'm bringing it in. I feel pretty good that I've got the moisture this year. Things feel pretty right. So if I've got my moisture, where am I going now? Well, we're going to look at packing and covering and feed out. And what we want to do is pack. So silage density, get this pack dense. We want to cover it and secure it to keep the oxygen away, particularly from the top. And when we do open it up and feed it out, we want to feed it out effectively. There are extras, as I said, with regards to inoculants and also not feeding some of that spoiled feed. I mean, that will do good things for your animals as well. So on packing, best practices. This actually came from an inoculant management book that I had, and I'll just show you this really quickly. Let me see if I can do this share again. Okay, just hold. If I go here, now just give me a second because this isn't exactly where I want to be. This is where I want to be. This qualitysilage.com is a really nice web page. I won't lie at all. They're in behind it. It's a number of the people who contribute. It's from inoculant companies. However, they do have a lot of good management tools, ways of measuring and equating your losses and your saves, and sort of really some good troubleshooting. So a useful site, and so that's where some of this is from. Now let me just go back to my new share. So layering. If I'm going to do my pile or my bunk, each layer that I'm pushing up should be 6 inches or less. And I can hear a number of you go right there, because how am I going to keep up with how fast this feed's coming in and how quickly those trucks are dropping it? But research upon research over and over and over shows that the thinner the layers, the more effectively you can pack it, which means you can increase the density, okay, which is feed per cubic foot. You can increase that density and decrease the oxygen. When you're doing a drive over pile, and the same thing for a bunk too, you know, a bunk, you need to get to those walls, but a drive over, you need to be able to be going over in every different direction. You do not go up and over and back and just leave the sides as you build up, because if these sides are not packed, then oxygen is constantly getting into them. And even when you do cover them, they aren't packed strongly enough that you've got enough microbial action there that you're going to have loss. On a drive over pile, you like high center to tapered ends, you know, and you want to go at a sort of a specific grade. And with regards to weight, this is an old one, but there's a number of other ones. Some of them look at how many minutes per ton you want to stay on, but this is a decent one for weight. And the same thing, I know some of you know it and you're just like, whatever. But if you go look at how many tons are coming into you per hour, and you multiply that by 800, it says what the weights of a tractor you should be. So this is saying 75 tons per hour times 800, I should have a 60,000 pound tractor. So I had this conversation not so long ago, and the gentleman was like, well, I have a 33,000 pound tractor, so there's no flipping way. The comment there would be, then there should be 2. The other thing is, if you can get weights on the front and the back in any form, they're going to help. Okay, you're not ever going to put weights on and be like, wow, that just didn't pack better. It absolutely does. But truly, if you're working with smaller tractors or in a situation where you absolutely don't need a larger tractor, then you should have one piling the whole time and one pushing up and piling. And there should be not one piling all the time, one packing all the time and one pushing up and packing. If you have a vehicle constantly driving over and over and over, that's increasing density. To which I know some of you will say, well, I'm custom and nobody's going to pay for another tractor and another man and more fuel. And then I go back to, yeah, but if that doesn't happen and we're leaving our $4,000 per acre out on the field, I don't think that tractor and that man's going to cost that much. So we need to look at the overall picture here, not just the moment in time. How will this put money in my wallet? Because we're going to increase density, we're going to keep oxygen out, and we're going to save the dry matter. Yeah.
A comment to that, we did have a farmer try that maybe 3 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
Did a drive over pile with 2 tractors instead of just the one with the custom crew. And they still claim to date that is the best silage they've ever produced. It packed so nicely, and really all they used was a, I don't know, 120, 150 horsepower front wheel assist tractor, which is their loader tractor. They have it on the farm, and that's what they used as the second tractor for packing.
Yeah.
They work good. It's got wheel weights and it's got a heavy loader on the front, so you got some weight there.
Absolutely.
It's amazing what difference that actually made for them.
Well, even if you look at this picture, there's this one pushing up. Now he's got to go back down and bring some more up and keep on that. Like he's got to sort of work in this way. But there's the other one, and all he's doing is packing down that peak. That's all he's doing. Boom, boom, boom. And as that other push comes, he's going to shift back because he's going to, keep increasing and moving that tapering. And then this next one's going to come, and all he's doing is back and forth, back and forth. That one tractor can't do all of that, no matter how heavy he is. So they're going to do it quicker. Okay, the whole thing's going to get packed better and faster. Okay.
Alexis, just a note on time. We're about an hour into it here now.
All right.
Okay.
So I'll start running like the wind. Here's just showing a 3-to-1, 15 to 18 foot max on a pile, and sort of a 3-to-1 ratio on reach up. Okay, just giving you a sense of a good taper. So why is oxygen the bad guy? As we know, if we improve density of silage, we are reducing the amount of oxygen, improving fermentation, preserving nutrients, and allowing for storage of more product per square foot. Okay, more dense, you're using less space. That saves you money as well. Density figures, this is when someone comes in and bores into your silage pile, pulls it out and measures to see how dense it is. They did tests and they found if you had 10 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot, that meant after 180 days, you were probably looking at about 20% of loss. If you had 22 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot, you were looking at 10% loss. You and I, we're probably looking at if we could get to 14, 15, or higher, but if we could be at 14, 15 right now, that would be good. And look at the difference between 20% to 16%. That's a good improvement. So if you can get beyond higher than 10, you're doing well. And that's what we're wanting to try and do. Reference back to that comment, if we're not there for 2 days and then we come back. So this product hasn't been totally packed. This also speaks to dry. And we've just moved product away. This again was an inoculant. This was an inoculant slide that I thought was valuable. And they just put their hand in and pulled out. So out on the surface, we're looking at about a 26 degrees in Fahrenheit, but just down in there below, it's 48 to 47 degrees. Or not Fahrenheit, sorry, degrees Celsius. It's already heating up. So packing and getting that oxygen out matters. If you don't, that's the kind of heating that can happen right away. Past that. So now, why cover it? Well, we've looked actually at why we want to. This is interesting though. Bolson talked about if you leave, this is from back in 2003. At that point, a lot of people weren't covering, and so they had done their tests. And so his comment literally was, but if left unprotected, dry matter losses in the top 1 to 3, sorry, I just have to move that, in the top 1 to 3 feet can exceed 60 to 70%, particularly disturbing when considering 15 to 25% of the silage might be in the top 3 feet. The spoilage is only apparent in the top 6 to 12 inches of silage, obscuring the fact that this area of spoiled silage represents substantially more silage as originally stored. So he figured it out at that time, okay, so this is 2003 in the US, that the loss on 100 by 250 foot silo means bunk to them, so that's a walled, in this case was, could exceed $10,000. And on a smaller 40 by 100, that was 2,000. So yeah, covering it absolutely matters. When, as we said, not today, or today, not tomorrow, if you can, as soon as you can, and get tires on just as quickly. You don't put it on, tack them down, and then walk away. The tires are not there to keep the plastic there. The tires are there to ensure that you've got even weight down so that oxygen isn't coming right up and under, okay? It's, and you don't just have to use tires, it's just they're there and they're effective, and most of us can get our hands on them. Okay, so it's not, well, I'll just put a tire here, or I'll put a few hay bales, it'll hold the plastic down. No, we're wanting even weight to keep the air from getting under. Michigan State did this breakdown from a monetary standpoint. If you want to just read through it, please go ahead, or you can come back. They're gonna record this. You can come back and look at the numbers closely. But they broke down what the value would be of if they didn't have the loss on the top. And so that total potential savings, if they didn't have, say, a 30% loss on the top 3 feet, they worked out to $15,322. So this was in 2011. Cost on plastic. Now this is plastic that they would have on the sides like this and fold over with an overlap. So this just isn't one piece because it looks pretty expensive. It's two that come over like that. So they had plastic, hours of labor at a $12 an hour, $350 for tires with a 10-year lifespan, $35. So they worked it as being the total cost to cover was $1,746, which made it essentially 7.8 to 1. So for every $8 you saved, you spent $1. Okay, in Alberta, I've heard them do steins where they're saying it's a 10-to-1 savings. The shape of your bunker pile, as we discussed, absolutely matters. Bunkers themselves, you don't want them, this avoid shaping. If you're too high over like this, water can come off and go into a shared bunk and create seepage loss on the side. So this is why they're saying if you can do it like that. If you don't have a bunk on the side, it's not as important. And here, this overlapping of plastic, it's the same thing. Some people put plastic on the side of the bunk, other side, and then cover over like this, as opposed to just sheeting. They find the plastic has protection, particularly if you have lock blocks or things like that that let in air. Here we're showing 38 degrees Celsius to 16. This had moisture coming in on the side, so that extra water, those bad bugs actually take the oxygen out of the H2O, utilize it, and break down your feed and create that heating. You can also use things, you don't have to use tires if you don't want to, if there's long-term investment you're interested in. The secure cover, we've just started dealing with it, and I'm sure I know there's people who sell it in Manitoba. So it's a heavier product that lays out, it's a woven product. In that you don't have to put tires on top of it, you put your plastic down, you put the secure cover down, and then you put sandbags along where sort of your covers cross, so it's not as labor intensive. As well, you keep it and you use it again and again and again. Also, there's recommendations too where they'll talk about putting that underlying it's like a saran wrap type product that goes on your bunk, and then your white plastic over top. Okay, so there's other options than just tires. And this is why we do it, right? We don't want to have this kind of loss. We don't want to look at our dollars either leaching away or sludging up. All right, we protect our food in our fridges, in our pantries. Okay, we protect our food because we know it spoils. We should be also doing the same thing with the same ideology for our animals. Feed out effectively. If you can feed straight across your face effectively, then you're going to have the least amount of loss at feed out time, and the least amount of product will be open for those microorganisms to get hold of that oxygen and start breaking it down again. So they're looking at average removal rates of 6 to 12 inches off the face per day, straight across. Warm weather, you're probably like in your hot summers, they're saying 18 inches, often I even will say up to 2 feet, depending. Okay, but the idea is not to go chunk, chunk, chunk. If you have to take your face off like that, if you can't move more than that in a day, you know, feed more than that, then you don't need as big a face. Okay, you need to be creating a smaller space, which means you need to be planning before you're taking that product off, how much you have to feed a day, how many tons you're putting in, and then how you're going to feed that out. Think about the end to help you plan at the beginning. This is showing someone doing just that. This is down, again, this is one of those inoculant images, but he was showing us this, I think this was down in California or Texas, where they had this huge face, and so they would just chunk in and feed off of this face for a while and leave this other one. And you can see from the measurements, the face here is 24 degrees Celsius, but this other that's being left is up to 32 and 33. So it's heating, which means the bad bugs are eating at the nutrients and creating heating events there. So the loss is happening. So why not feed all the way across the front as opposed to breaking in like that? Finally, I just wanted to talk at feed out. If you can wait, please do. If you don't have to feed that product right away, please wait, because for corn silage specifically, remember we were talking about dry matter digestibility, and we were talking about NDF-D, C30 at 30 hours, and we're talking about starch digestibility, starch over time. They look at the same thing, going from 0 months to 11 months. And you can see, let's look at NDF-D at 30. Right away when it's in there, its NDF-D came back at 29.2%. And at 9 months, it was 38.6. Starch after 12-hour starch availability was 69.3, got up to 73. Corn silage gets better over time. The longer you can leave it in there, as well as with it being packed effectively, the more nutrient action you're going to get from it, and your cows will gain that much more. Okay, if you have to go early, 4 weeks is making me anxious, but if you got to do it at least that, 6 weeks would be better. 9 weeks would be better still. Okay. That face, you're welcoming the oxygen back. So please keep it, I'm just reiterating, please keep it flat. So on to extras. I referenced, if you can't feed spoiled, if you cannot feed spoiled silage, I wish you wouldn't. Again, going back to Bolson, they did a test, and I didn't expect this to happen, but they did a quick test, not a quick test. They did a test where they put in 25% spoiled feed with 75% good, 50%, 75%, and they measured how things worked out. And they found that 25% spoilage had a larger impact than expected on both dry matter intake, so that animals taking in more feed, and overall digestibility, so it working through the system well, and the body, the gut taking in all the nutrients it could. So 1 pound less dry matter intake a day was what they found, with a 7% lower NDF digestibility and a 10% lower ADF. So what that means is, if they're going to take in, if you're going to take away 1 pound less of dry matter, that means you've got to top up with something else, because you want that gain to keep happening, which means you're going to be putting more money into something that should be doing it for you on your own. If you just take out that 25% spoilage, that 1 pound less comes back. Okay, so that's twofold. We'd like not to have that spoilage, but by feeding it, we think by them eating it all, that's good. We're saving money. We're not actually. We're still affecting their intake, and they're not taking in the good stuff as well. So we have to feed more of it. All right. And finally, inoculants do help. If you have good bacteria fighting the bad bacteria, again, research goes on and on. I know some guys don't want to spend the money, but if you're putting in good bacteria at the front end at harvest and putting it in on its siling, it can take over and fight that bad bacteria, help to drop that pH quicker, get to the fermentation well. And any molds that maybe have been brought off the field, etc., it can help to inhibit them. As well, you can get a back end one that when you're opening up the face, it helps to keep the face cool. So there are many options, and they can assist with improving that, both the ensiling and the feed out phase. So silage, it's anaerobic. Oxygen is the enemy. We want to keep it out. We have to rethink our feed and look at energy, keeping that energy there, drying down that product to the point where our moisture works and we can save, so we don't have to feed, say, grain and supplements and spend the money there. We want to have that corn that fits for us. We want to make sure that our dry matter losses are kept to a minimum. We don't just look at how many green tons we have. We measure out how many dry matter tons we have and really know the value of them. And we want to pack it to the best of our ability. We want to cover it, seal it effectively, not just cover it with some plastic and pin it down. We want to seal it tightly down, and we want to feed it out straight across that face every day. And if we can, we really don't want to put spoiled silage into the feed, because it will affect their intake, which means even the good stuff they're not taking in as much, so we're actually losing at the feed bunk. Sorry, I feel like I just raced through that back end. I apologize.
That's okay. I haven't had any more questions tick in, not yet anyway. But I do have one. I know we're a little bit over time here, but we've actually haven't lost anybody yet, which is pretty.
Sorry about that. I know I do know, I was saying to Soren, I know I put an immense amount of information there, but I feel because you can potentially go back to it and look over it, there's certain facts and bits and pieces and even some reference to research that's useful. I haven't been able to get my everywhere I took information from, but I will get that sheet out to them so they can have that, so you can go look at some of the information directly as well, just for your own records.
I have a couple of follow-up questions here, kind of maybe not related to this topic, but we did have some, we were pretty dry over the summer, so some corn plants actually didn't have any cob on the plant, very small plant, no cob on it at all. What kind of nutrients do we have in the plant like that? Because it hasn't produced any cob at all. It's got to be somewhere. Is it all in the ground still?
Yeah, so What's essentially happening, so again, why we grow corn? We grow corn for energy. Where do we get that energy? Well, we get it from the sugars and the starches. That's the big ticket item. So if there's no cob there, then basically we're missing the key reason why we've grown it. So off the front end, we're not where we want to be. So what we have is a lot of product. We've got, and not as much as normal, obviously, but we've got a good amount of product there. So we have, fodder to put into them, but we're lacking the real thing that we want, which is energy. And so is there nutrient there? If there's some cob, if it's white, even if it's at blister stage, there is some sugar there for sure. And if it can ensile well, but again, that comes down to moisture. And if it's really quite dry, then we run into problems again. But if it could ensile well, we would have something. But the key is, remember when I was talking about when you've ensiled, you can see your corn silage get better. Yeah. Without your starch there, without your sugars there effectively, you won't see that kind of increase. And if it's been really dry, our digestibility is affected. So our ability for that NDFD, that digestibility over time to get better, that also is affected. So yeah, no cob is a real loss. I mean, the reason that means we don't have corn, which means we don't have the value there that we want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Had another question come in here. What about using salt on top of the pile, between the pile and the plastic?
To what, as a preservative?
Yeah.
Over time, what they found is that the only real viable preservatives that have a significant effect within the pile are live bacteria. Can they help with some breakdown as a preservative that way? Potentially, yes. I'm not saying it couldn't, but one of the things that I find is that I found is if you're just trying to preserve face or side, you're not necessarily preserving the nutrition within. So yes, you can try it, but will it stop that shrinkage and that loss and the bad bugs from going at your product, below surface? No, not necessarily. Research upon research has found basically they call it even live acting bacteria, labs, LAB. So live acting bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, labs, which are live, they are key to really a great preservation, and it's from the inside up.
Okay. One more quick question before we round it up here. Can corn silage be too cold to ensile? We had some cold days. We have some cold days every year. We will be chopping corn in, and you know where I'm coming from. I'm just going out to look at a pile where one end of the pile was ensiled and the other end wasn't. Mm-hmm. And doing samples, 3 spots of the pile, that was exactly what we found here last week, actually.
Yeah.
Very puzzling, very interesting at the same time. What's your feedback on that?
So I didn't follow up with you on that one completely. So was the area that ensiled sort of within the pile and the area that wasn't outside, or was it? Where was the placement on that pile, or was it random?
What had ensiled was what was chopped first, where it was a slightly warmer days, and then the middle of the pile was ensiled as well. But what they were feeding out today hasn't ensiled at all.
Right. So I think essentially what's happening there is the moisture is getting tied up because of the cold potentially. And so what moisture is there, which the sample I saw was on ensiled product, and so it was good. Like the moisture looked good, and you had said this has ensiled, and I was like, overall this looks like a fine breakdown. So I haven't seen anything on what the unensiled came through on, but my gut tells me that basically it came through, and what moisture was there, which wasn't super high, but was good. What moisture came through basically almost freeze dried away. And so you're now having a product that's cold. So we're not having heating events necessarily, but we're not having proper packing and drop in pH and microbial action that should be happening to ferment that product. So yeah, I think essentially they saw that. I wonder if it had been a little higher in sugar or carbohydrate, or if it had been a little higher in moisture as well, if that might have combated the situation. and I can't say for sure. I wonder if that would have had a more positive effect on it.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. We don't have any more questions come in at this time, so thank you very much, Alexis, for taking the time to do this webinar with us. Right on. I think we'll close with that. Thank you very much, everybody, and especially thank you to you, Alexis. And yeah, Merry Christmas to everybody. If I don't talk to you before the end of the year, Happy New Year as well.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thanks all.